Welcome to the Private School Leader Podcast, where private school leaders learn how to thrive and not just survive as they serve and lead their schools. I strongly believe that it is possible to have a long and happy and fulfilling career as a private school leader. And my passion is to help you figure out exactly how to do just that, right here on the Private School Leader Podcast. And I'm your host, Mark Minkus. So I want to start today's episode with a prediction, because I believe that over the next 2 years, let's say, that one of the biggest conversations in our independent and our private schools is actually not going to be about AI. It's not going to be about enrollment. It's not going to be about teacher shortages. Actually, I think it's not even going to be about school choice. My prediction is that one of the biggest conversations happening in our private schools over the next couple of years is going to be how much technology actually belongs in the classroom. Because for almost 20 years, our public schools, our private schools, we've kind of been racing towards more technology, more devices, more one-to-one, more digital, textbooks, more apps, more online assessments. And of course, what that has led to is more screen time. And that was especially true during COVID. And, in many of our schools, and I'm guilty of this too, especially when I think back to when I was head of school for 21 years, I think a lot of us equate technology with innovation. We've got this technology lab, this computer lab, STEM, so on and so forth. And I think that the assumption that I made, or the assumption maybe that we made as private school leaders was pretty simple and pretty sound, that, if some technology is good, then more technology must be better. But the reason for today's episode is because there's been a change. There's been a sea change that I've seen over the last, let's call it 18 months, because parents and teachers and researchers have been asking different questions. And there's a growing movement that has emerged, and it's kind of an umbrella term. We're going to call it the Unplugged Movement. At the same time, recently, a book came out called The Digital Delusion by a neuroscientist, Dr. Cooney Horvath. And this has become one of the most talked about books, not just among educators, but among a lot of parents. And I want to talk about that today too, because whether or not you agree with the stuff that Dr. Horvath has concluded in Digital Delusion isn't really the point. That's not what we're going to talk about today. What is the important point that I want you to hear is that parents are either talking about this book or they're going to hear about this book. Your parents and your board members, for that matter, are going to continue to hear more about this Unplugged movement. And then the parents are going to start asking questions. The board, the teachers are going to start asking questions. And if you're not prepared as a leader in your private school, someone else is going to start defining that narrative. Someone else is going to define the conversation. Someone else is going to come and say, well, we want less of this and we want more of that. And if we're not ready for it, then I think we're going to be reacting and we're going to be on the defensive, and I want you to be proactive. And so on today's episode of the Private School Leader Podcast, I'm going to ask you a question. Is your school ready for the Unplugged movement and the Digital Delusion backlash? So before we start, I want to just give you a free gift, free resource called The 6 Things That Every Private School Teacher Wants from Their Leader. This guide is a 6-page PDF that I think will be a game changer for you. And I guarantee you that if you do these 6 things, the teachers at your school will be happy to follow you. And you can grab this free guide by going to theprivateschoolleader.com/guide. That, again, is the 6 things that every private school teacher wants from their leader. That's free for you by going to theprivateschoolleader.com/guide. So let me give you a heads up about the structure of today's episode. So I've decided to break it into 4 parts. Part 1, I'm going to explain this unplugged movement. What is this? Part 2, I'm going to talk about the book, The Digital Delusion. What's in it? How is it being used in public schools? How might it be being used in our private schools in the near future? And then the third part is I'm going to give you 4 reasons why all of this matters for you as a private school leader. And then, of course, at the end, I'll give you 4 strategies for how to be prepared for the unplugged movement and the digital delusion backlash. So let's start by talking about what is the unplugged movement. So this is really kind of like an umbrella term, although there are, like, I live in Pennsylvania, so there's Unplugged PA, there's Unplugged California. There are local chapters that are popping up all over the place with the word unplugged in the title, but there are many different organizations that are popping up, about screen-free advocacy and things of that nature. And so unplugged movement is kind of an umbrella term, and I'm using it to describe a lot of kind of overlapping movements. So we've got phone-free schools, and I'll talk more about that in a minute, how that has changed in the past 2 years dramatically. A smartphone-free childhood is something that a lot of parents are pushing for, and that has a little less to do with you at your school and more to do with just, again, a shift in American culture. And again, the umbrella term is also talking about like a push for screen-free schools or distraction-free schools or reduced screen time, especially among younger students. And so we're just going to lump all that together and call it the unplugged movement. This is something where parents and educators are pushing for better conversations, better answers, better data, better policies, better philosophy explanation on all of these things. Okay? So then the question is, well, how big has this gotten? And this is important. I want you to understand this isn't just a niche conversation anymore, because now, today, as you're listening to this, you've got governors in 28 states signing legislation to support bell-to-bell phone-free schools. There's, as I'm recording this, there's 28 states that have legislation that say phone-free schools. And then there's other legislators that are introducing screen time bills that would limit screen time in general on other devices. So we've gone from phones to Chromebooks and iPads, etc. We've got a lot of parent advocacy organizations out there, as I mentioned before. There's some actual national nonprofits that are continuing to grow in their scale and in their resources that are supporting parents who want to effect change in their school. And as I'll talk about in a minute, you've got researchers that are out here publishing books and articles and white papers about this subject. So this isn't a small thing. And then another big thing that I'm going to talk about is just within the past month, the president of the American Federation for Teachers, AFT, gave a speech about this and is calling for major screen reductions. And so, and then you've got media outlets, major media outlets that are covering this story. And I'm going to link several articles at the show notes, privateschoolleader.com/episode 193. And that'll just give you kind of an idea of the scope of this. So we've talked about what is it? We've talked about how big has it gotten? Let's answer the question, when did it start? So a lot of people point to when Jonathan Haidt published The Anxious Generation in 2024, which wasn't that long ago. So that's one sort of starting line. But it's now gone into, I just want to explain a little bit about, well, what is it? What do they believe? What are parents and educators and researchers who are part of the Unplugged movement, what are they really going for? Well, I think at face value, it feels like they're anti-technology, but I don't think that's true. I just think that they're anti-overuse of technology, especially with younger students. And so they are starting to ask some important questions that maybe haven't really been asked before. And it's like, are we trading learning for digital, for screen time? And what I'm seeing, and maybe you're seeing this too, is parents are noticing things. Maybe it's a shorter attention span or more anxiety. And rightly or wrongly, they want to blame someone for what they're seeing in their kids. Maybe their kids are more easily distracted or they're less resilient. There's a million reasons why that's happening, but I think that screen time has become a convenient scapegoat for parent fears and concerns. So just keep that in mind, that there's anxiety driving this movement. Some of it is driven by research. Some of it is driven by very justifiable concerns or questions, but some of it is also driven by anxiety. And so then in our schools, I mentioned we're seeing more phone restrictions. We're seeing, we want to try to limit screen time. We're seeing some schools move back to cursive writing and getting outside more and more project-based learning and really decreasing the screen time, and, paper and pencil have been making a comeback. And so I'm sure that that's starting to happen in your schools as well. And so I just think that when you think about 2 years ago, and I know it's hard to get in your time machine and go 2 years ago, but 2 years ago, if someone was saying there's going to be more than half of the states in America that have laws that say bell to bell kids in public schools can't have their phones during the day, I don't think too many people, I wouldn't have believed that 2 years ago, but it happened. And so I'm just trying to show you the power of this movement so that it gets your attention, because we need to be paying attention to this. And so the last question on the Unplugged movement, and then we'll talk about the Digital Delusion, is where do we think this is going? What do thought leaders, the literature, where do, in my opinion, where do we think this is going? So I think phase one, again, since The Anxious Generation came out, I think phase one was like 2024, 2025. And the big thing there was phones are distracting at school. And the big solution was let's remove the phones. Let's remove access to the phones. And there was a lot of advocacy and legislation and push. And now it's very successful. And I think it's only a matter of time until many more states adopt the bell-to-bell phone-free schools. Okay, so that was phase one in 2024, 2025. Well, I think that phase two is going to be from 2026 maybe through 2028, where this is headed. And that's going to be parents asking questions like, do elementary kids need Chromebooks? Why is my first grader on an iPad? Are students reading enough printed books? Are they doing handwriting? Why don't we do more worksheets? Why are we on, and so these are different questions than maybe what they've been asking before. And so I guess what I'm getting at is like phones were this big obstacle for this movement, and that obstacle has pretty much fallen out of the way. And so there's going to be another goal. There's going to be something next for the movement. And I really believe that it is parents questioning, because this is already happening, parents questioning and wanting answers, and wanting specific answers. How much time in a week is my first grader on a screen? Do you know the answer to that question? I don't know the answer to that question. Why do you have Chromebooks in your school? So some of this is getting into like the philosophy and also the metrics, and they're going to continue to ask these hard questions. So that leads me to The Digital Delusion, which is a book by Dr. Jared Cooney Horvath, and he is a neuroscientist and an educator. And he wrote this book. It came out in 2026. And his central argument is that that is not that technology is evil, but he feels like classroom technology has promised more than it actually delivered. And one of his big points is there's been massive investments in educational technology, but where's the data that this has actually improved learning? Some of the other things that he's arguing is, just these claims that we've, I guess, in general accepted over the past 20 years. And he points out that they're not as well supported by research as maybe many of us assume. And these assumptions might be things like today's kids learn differently, or that digital natives need to have screens in front of them in school, or technology increases engagement. And so those are assumptions, but parents are becoming more and more like, okay, show me. Where's your philosophy? Where's your tracking as far as like how much screen time is happening? And so I'll come back in a minute to a couple more things that are in this book, but I think it's important for you to understand, how is the Digital Delusion book, how is it being used by parents and educators in the Unplugged movement? So first of all, I came up with a list of 3 ways. So first of all, it's giving parents words to articulate their argument. I think this has been a generally agreed upon thing among many parents, that there's too much screen time in school, and their focus was on phones, and now that, has kind of fallen by the wayside. And so what's next is iPads, Chromebooks, laptops, etc., even the computers in the STEM lab. And so they've had these general thoughts, but it seems like the book, The Digital Delusion, has given them their talking points. Okay. And so this book is coming up again and again. It gives them the opportunity to point to an expert. Well, Dr. Horvath says ... or this book, Digital Delusion, says ... And then what's happening as far as how it's being used is that you can just Google Digital Delusion being handed out at school board meetings, okay, let's say, and there's school districts all over America where parents are showing up. Let's say there's 9 people on the board at the local public school district school board meeting. They're showing up with 9 copies of the Digital Delusion, and they're passing it out to board members. And so just to kind of give you a synopsis of that, I'm going to link an article in the show notes. It's an NBC News article from May 31st, 2026, and it's called The Book Fueling a Movement Against Screens in Schools, and it kind of summarizes what I'm talking about. So this book exists. That's important for you to know. I'm not saying you need to run out and buy this book. Maybe ChatGPT can give you a summary, because you're very, very busy. If you want to read the book, that's up to you. But again, I've given you a little bit of an idea of what the book is about. Another theme that Dr. Horvath uses in his book is that learning is fundamentally human, and that students learn best through conversation, guided practice, retrieval, feedback, repetition, and relationships is something that's in the book. Now, I don't think we agree. I don't think we disagree with that. I think we can get on board with that is a good way to learn. And sometimes technology supports those things, Dr. Horvath argues, but it can't or shouldn't replace them. And one line in the book that really stood out to me is he has this idea that we've sometimes confused activity with learning. So let me tell you that again. We've sometimes confused activity with learning. Now, there is a lot of pushback on this book about his research and about his conclusions. And, some educators point to a lot of success with different, types of technology. So it's not necessarily that it's like the holy grail of all books in the world, but it is a book that people are grabbing, people are passing out at board meetings, And I think it's only a matter of time until the parents at our private schools are aware of this book, become familiar with this book, and then want to use some of the research or some of the talking points from this book to ask you and your teachers some tough questions. So then this brings us to part 3 of the episode, and I'm going to give you 4 reasons why this matters for our private schools. So we've talked about the Unplugged Movement. I've talked about the book, The Digital Delusion. Let me give you 4 reasons why I think this matters for our schools. Reason number 1, parents are going to ask tougher questions. So instead of asking, do you have one-to-one devices, they are probably going to start asking, why do you have one-to-one at your school? That's a big difference. Like in our schools, I think for so many years, technology has been viewed as a competitive advantage. We have this many computers, we have this robotics program, we have iPads, we have one-to-one, we have Chromebooks for blah, blah, blah. But that isn't impressing people the way that it once did. And parents want, in my opinion, in my experience, and in my research in preparing for this episode, parents want us to be more intentional and to be tracking the usage so that we can have answers to those questions. How much? So why and how much? The parents are going to be asking tougher questions. Reason number 2 why this matters. Your educational philosophy at your school will matter more. Okay? So we're going to talk about a technology philosophy when we get to the strategies, and that's different than a technology policy. But just for the time being, reason number 2, your educational philosophy is going to matter more. Sometimes we aren't great at articulating our educational philosophy at our schools. And so, can you clearly explain, why do students use devices at your school? When do they use them? When they don't use them, why are they not using them? Where's the research that supports your decision? And I'm not saying that this feels great. It feels sometimes like, well, okay, I don't work for the parents. They're not my boss. Why do I have to just, when they say jump, why do I have to say how high? I get it. But I think that schools that are like, well, we've had one-to-one since, 2018 and blah, blah, blah. Like, I think we need to get better at articulating things, or we're really going to struggle when it comes to these questions. Okay. Reason number 3 why this matters is that technology may become a marketing differentiator. And I know that's a mouthful. Technology may become a marketing differentiator, but let me explain what I mean. So I want you to imagine 2 tours. So you've got a prospective family on a tour. And on one tour, your admissions person is saying, we are on the cutting edge as far as digital, and we've got iPads and Chromebooks, and we're one-to-one, and here's our STEM lab, and blah, blah, blah. And that's kind of like all they say. But imagine tour number 2, where someone, the person leading the tour, says, well, at our school, we intentionally balance technology with other stuff like discussion and handwriting and books and being outdoors and, building that human connection and building character. So that's a big deal. And I've been for years, on tours would really push the technology and access, and if we were one-to-one and all that kind of stuff. But I'm just saying that I think that schools, and we're all thinking about enrollment, we're all thinking about conversion from tours to enrollment, etc. I just want you to kind of picture those 2 tours, one that's really pushing the technology, but one that is mentioning the technology or pointing it out, but then explicitly stating that we balance our technology with ... all of the things that we know are best practice as far as learning. That's going to be heard very differently by families. And so it used to be that technology was a differentiator, And what I'm saying is that I think moving forward, that technology is still going to be a differentiator, but it's not any longer how much you have. It's what is your philosophy and how do you use it and how intentional are you about using it? So I think that's going to be the thing that gets the attention of parents on tours, especially over the next couple of years. And then reason number 4 why this matters is because in my experience, what's happening in public schools usually trickles down and influences parent expectations in our private schools. And so in May of 2026, American Federation of Teachers President Randy Weingarten, so the AFT, huge teacher union in the United States, she, in May of 2026, delivered a major speech titled, "Devices Down, Eyes Up, Hands On." And this was a big deal as far as like what she talked about in this speech that she delivered. And in that speech, she was specifically calling for, now this is the president of the AFT, okay, is calling for no screens in pre-K through grade 2, period, limits on AI access, more project-based learning, more hands-on learning, fewer passive digital experience where kids are just passively on a device, and stronger research before adopting technology. So why is this significant? Well, you know, when one of the largest teacher organizations in America is advocating for fewer screens, how long is that going to be until that conversation just doesn't stay in the public school arena, but it's going to trickle into our private schools if it hasn't already at your school? Because parents are hearing it, teachers are hearing it, and they want to talk about it. And so as private school leaders, we need to be prepared to answer those questions thoughtfully and not with an opinion or a knee-jerk reaction or we've always done it that way. And so that speech that I mentioned, I'm going to put a link in the show notes at theprivateschoolleader.com/episode 193 of President Weingarten's speech, "Devices Down, Eyes Up, Hands On." I'm just telling you, and I think you know this to be true, that's a big deal. Because if the AFT is pushing for something, then it's only a matter of time until that starts to trickle down into our private schools. And then finally, let's wrap it up with giving you 4 strategies for how to be, I asked you the question, the title of this episode is your school prepared for the Unplugged Movement and the Digital Delusion Backlash? And so let me give you 4 strategies to be prepared. Strategy number 1 is audit your technology. So when you audit your technology, what I mean by that is don't ask the question, well, what technology do we have? How many iPads, how many Chromebooks, etc.? How many digital textbooks, etc.? But rather ask yourself, what learning problem does each piece of technology actually solve? Because every device should have a purpose, okay? And so it's just really, really, really interesting to kind of do this thought exercise. Instead of like thinking about the technology in your school as far as how much, it's like, what learning problem does it solve? Does this device solve, this Chromebook? And so every device should have a purpose. So strategy number 1 is audit your technology. Strategy number 2 is to develop a technology philosophy. Now, we have educational philosophy in our handbook, and we have technology policy in our handbook. But I'm saying that our schools need to think about developing a technology philosophy. Now, maybe you have that, and that's awesome if you do, but many schools don't. This is not a technology policy about usage and taking good care of the Chromebook and about what happens if you're going to websites that you shouldn't go to. That's a technology policy. There's a difference here. You know, policies tell us what to do and what not to do, but the philosophy, your technology philosophy, explains why your school does what you do with your technology. And so if a parent asks you, for example, well, why do second graders use iPads? Or, you know, can you answer that consistently? Can your second grade teachers answer that question in a consistent way? And so, again, the way to get on the same page as a school so that your teachers can all answer that question in the same way is to have a philosophy for technology. So something for you to consider. And then strategy number 3 is to measure learning, not just engagement. So, again, Digital Delusion, one of the big points of that book is that we've mistaken activity for learning. And so since that's kind of a huge point in that book, I decided to create one of the strategies sort of around that. Because technology, when you see kids on devices, you walk in, they look engaged, but just because they're engaged doesn't mean they're learning. So how are we going to measure learning instead of just anecdotally with our eyes seeing engagement? And so there's a couple of questions that you can ask. Well, let me just give you one question, actually. Would this lesson still be effective without that device? Okay. So if you want to you want a starting point. Yeah, okay, that's great. I want to measure learning, not engagement. How do I even begin to do that? If we start asking the question, would this lesson still be effective without the technology? If the answer is yes, okay. If the answer is no, then we need to ask why. And so that's a place to start. And then strategy number 4 is to just be balanced, be intentionally balanced in your school. Like, I don't think the future of our private schools is going to be schools that reject technology. But I also don't think it's going to be that, I don't think the future belongs to the schools that just embrace everything. Every app, every device, every new thing. I think the future of our private schools really belongs to schools that can confidently say, we use technology where it improves learning. And then there's a way, and then you have actually measured that. It's not just a thing you say. and then if we also, the other big thing that parents are concerned about is the screens taking the place of human interaction or replacing, discussion and face-to-face conversations and greetings, and replacing handwriting or reading, with a real book in their hands, or, developing relationships. A lot of the concerns are around those things. We just need a stronger message. And I used to say this, I'd be like, well, we're a one-to-one school. And that was sort of like, I wore that as a badge of honor, and that was like a big deal. And it's like, our middle school, we're one-to-one Chromebooks. Okay. Maybe that worked in 2018 or 2019, but pushing that in the absence of a philosophy or intentionality, or being able to actually measure how much time kids are on screens, it's going to make it so much more difficult when you're having conversations with parents who are asking these good questions. We need to have better answers. And so, what are the big takeaways from today's episode? Well, I talked to you about the umbrella term of the Unplugged Movement and kind of where it's been and where it's headed. And then I talked to you about the book, The Digital Delusion, and why that book matters, because it's giving parents talking points and it's empowering them. It's making them feel a little more courageous. It's making them feel like the research in there is valid. And so they're activating a little more because of this book. And then I gave you 4 reasons why this matters for private schools. Number 1, parents will begin asking tougher questions. Number 2, your educational philosophy will matter more. Number 3, technology may become a differentiator on your tours and in your admissions. And number 4, public schools usually influence the expectations of the parents at your school. And that goes back to that AFT speech from the president of the AFT. And then I gave you 4 strategies. Audit your technology. Number 2, develop a technology philosophy. Number 3, measure learning, not engagement. And number 4, be intentional. So I always like to end every episode with a call to action. And your call to action is just sometime in the next week is to just take 15 minutes. Maybe you go to the show notes, privateschoolleader.com/episode 193, and you read an article. Maybe you go back over part of this episode. Is to just take 30 minutes sometime in the next week and give this some time and attention. Think about, how would I answer these questions at our school? Or do we have a technology philosophy? Do we need one? So I know that's a little bit of a more vague call to action than usual, but I want you to just take 30 minutes sometime in the next week and think about the stuff that we talked about on today's episode, and then take one action as far as moving in the direction that will help your school. One last reminder that the 6 things that every private school teacher wants from their leader is a free guide for you, and you can grab that at theprivateschoolleader.com/guide. If you got help from this episode, if you feel like there's another private school leader in your life that needs to hear this episode, please share the link with them in an email or a text. And also, if you want to follow on Instagram and check out what I'm doing there at the Private School Leader. And a new episode obviously comes out every week on Spotify, Apple, wherever you listen to your podcast. And if you would write a review and leave a rating, that helps to push this out as suggested content to private school leaders all over the world. And I appreciate you. I've been your host, Mark Minkus. Thank you for taking some of your precious time to join me here today. And I'll see you next time right here on the Private School Leader Podcast. And until then, always remember to serve first, lead second, and make a difference.